Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the center of the Great Council chamber, watching as 12 different alien species discussed humanity's fate. The massive space station called New Geneva floated in the darkness between stars, its walls filled with creatures that looked nothing like humans. Some had crystal skin that sparkled under the lights. Others breathed water and spoke through special devices. A few looked like giant insects with many arms. Jake had served in space for 30 years. He had fought pirates, explored new worlds, and helped build peace between the stars. But today felt different. Today, fear filled the air like a thick fog. Dr. Lisa Carter sat at the human table. Her research files spread before her. She had spent months studying the enemy that was coming toward their part of the galaxy. The Void Swarm, they called it. A force of living darkness that ate entire star systems like a hungry beast. "The data is clear," Lisa said, standing to address the council. "The swarm has destroyed 47 civilizations in the past century. They move from galaxy to galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Our telescopes show them entering our space in 6 months." The alien delegates listened, but Jake could see the fear in their strange eyes. The Thrakari representative, a being made of living crystal, spoke first. "These creatures target technology. Our cities, our ships, our very civilization draws them like light draws moths." Captain Ryan Hayes, a man who had fought in 3 wars, stepped forward. "That's exactly why we need to work together. 12 races, 12 fleets, 12 different ways of fighting. We can stop them if we stand united." The chamber fell silent. Jake watched as the alien delegates looked at each other but not at the humans. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire rose from his seat. His people looked like tall, thin humans but with skin that changed colors. Right now his skin showed deep purple, which Jake knew meant serious thought. "The Zephyrian Empire has made its decision," Vextar announced. "We will not fight this enemy. Our ships are already preparing to leave for the Outer Rim galaxies." Jake felt his heart sink. The Zephyrians had the most powerful ships in the Council. Without them, any fight would be much harder. The Nereid representative spoke next. Her voice came through a water-filled helmet that covered her fish-like head. "The Nereid Federation agrees. We have found safe ocean worlds far from here. Our people will survive there." One by one, each alien race announced their plans to run away. The Krathari would hide in deep space. The Volani would sleep in underground cities until the danger passed. The Sikari would use their time travel technology to skip forward 1,000 years. Jake watched his allies abandon him with each word. These were the same beings who had called humans friends. The same ones who had traded with Earth and shared their knowledge. Now they spoke of leaving like it was the only choice that made sense. "What about the billions of people on human worlds?" Ryan demanded. "What about the colonies that can't just pack up and leave?" Vextar's skin turned red with anger. "Humanity's problem is that you always think fighting is the answer. You are too aggressive, too violent. Your people solve every problem with weapons and war. We fight because we have to," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "Someone has to stand against the darkness, and that is exactly why we cannot help you," the Thrakari delegate said, its crystal body ringing like a bell. "Your species brings violence wherever it goes. We will not risk our civilizations for a people who cannot learn peace." Dr. Carter stood up, her face red with anger. "We helped you fight the shadow pirates. We shared our medical knowledge when the Red Plague hit your worlds. We have been good allies." "Yes," Vextar agreed. "But allies in peace, not in hopeless wars. The swarm cannot be defeated. It has destroyed races far older and more advanced than humanity. Running is the only smart choice." "Then run," Jake said quietly. "But know this, humans don't run from fights we can't avoid." The alien delegates began filing out of the chamber. Some looked sad, others relieved. A few wouldn't even look at the humans as they left. Within minutes, the great council hall stood empty except for the 3 humans. Jake looked around at the empty seats where Earth's allies had sat just moments before. 30 years of friendship, trade, and cooperation had just walked out the door. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "So what do we do now?" Ryan asked. Lisa gathered her research files with shaking hands. "We go home. We warn Earth. We prepare for war. Against an enemy that destroyed 47 civilizations?" Ryan shook his head. "With no allies, no advanced technology, and no chance of winning?" Jake walked to the great window that looked out into space. Somewhere in that darkness the swarm was coming. Somewhere behind them the alien fleets were already preparing to run away. And somewhere ahead lay Earth, with its blue oceans and billions of people who had no idea what was coming. "We do what humans have always done," Jake said without turning around. "We stand and fight even when we stand alone." "The Council was right about one thing," Lisa said softly. "Humans do solve problems with violence, but maybe that's not always wrong. Maybe sometimes violence is the only answer left." Ryan moved to stand beside Jake at the window. 47 civilizations, all more advanced than us, all destroyed. 47 civilizations that probably tried to run, hide, or negotiate, Jake replied. "Maybe what the swarm hasn't faced yet is a species too stubborn to know when they're beaten." The three humans stood in silence looking out at the stars. Soon those stars would be filled with an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and humanity would face that enemy alone. But as Jake looked at his reflection in the window, he saw something that the alien delegates had missed. He saw the face of a species that had crawled out of caves to reach the stars, a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed others. The aliens had called humans violent and aggressive. Maybe they were right. But as the first reports of swarm scouts began coming in on the long-range sensors, Jake realized that might be exactly what this fight needed. "Send a message to Earth," he told Ryan. "Tell them the Council has abandoned us. Tell them we fight alone." "And what else?" Ryan asked. Jake smiled grimly. "Tell them to get ready for war." 6 months had passed since the Council meeting, and Earth looked different now. General Nick Taylor stood in the war room deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching screens that showed activity across the entire solar system. Every human world was busy building weapons, training soldiers, and preparing for a war they had little chance of winning. The room buzzed with activity as officers reported from different sectors. Mars was building new factories every day. The asteroid belt had become a massive shipyard. Even the farming colonies were learning to make weapons from their tools. "How many ships do we have now?" Nick asked his aide. 4,000 combat vessels, sir. Most of them converted civilian ships with military weapons bolted on. Nick nodded. It sounded like a lot until you remembered that the swarm had destroyed fleets 10 times that size. But it was what they had, and humans had learned to work with what they had. Engineer Paula Jones walked into the room, her clothes dirty from working in the shipyards. She had been awake for 3 days straight, helping turn passenger ships into fighters. Her teams worked around the clock, welding armor, plating onto cruise ships, and mounting weapons on cargo haulers. "The new plasma cannons are ready for testing," she reported. "They're not as advanced as alien technology, but they're simple and reliable. More importantly, we can build thousands of them." Professor Alan Brooks looked up from his research station. He had been working with Dr. Lisa Carter to understand everything they could about the swarm. Most of their information came from the wreckage of destroyed alien ships found floating in space. "The swarm uses biological technology," Alan explained to the gathered officers. "Their ships are alive, not built. That means they can heal damage, but it also means they follow patterns. Living things follow patterns." Commander Amy Davis entered the room still wearing her pilot suit. She had been training new pilots in the asteroid fields, pushing human reflexes to their limits. Her students learned to fly ships that were smaller and faster than anything the aliens used. "The new pilots are getting better," she reported. "Human reaction time is actually faster than most alien species. We might not have the best ships, but we have the best pilots." "What about the swarm's weapons?" Nick asked. Dr. Carter's voice came over the communication system from her lab on Mars. "They use energy that drains power from enemy ships. Most alien technology stops working when hit by swarm weapons, but our older, simpler systems seem more resistant. Colonel Steve Nelson had just returned from the frontier worlds. His job was to set up defenses on the outer colonies, knowing that these would likely be the first places the swarm attacked. His face looked tired, but determined. "The colonists are ready," he said. "We've built underground shelters and hidden weapon depots. Every farmer knows how to use a rifle, and every miner can handle explosives." Nick looked at the map showing human space. It wasn't much compared to the empires the aliens had built. 57 star systems, 200 colonies, and about 15 billion people, small numbers compared to the vast civilizations that the swarm had already destroyed. But humans had something those other civilizations didn't have. They had grown up fighting for everything they got. Earth's history was full of wars, disasters, and struggles that had made humanity tough in ways the peaceful alien races weren't. "Dr. Stone, what's your report?" Nick asked. Dr. Rebecca Stone's image appeared on the main screen from her underground laboratory on Mars. She had been studying human genetics, trying to understand why humans were different from other species. "I've found something interesting," she said. "Humans have an unusual brain structure compared to other intelligent species. Most aliens have very organized, logical minds, but human brains are chaotic, unpredictable. We call it creativity, but it might be our greatest weapon." "How so?" Paula asked. "The swarm operates as a hive mind. It thinks in patterns and expects its enemies to think in patterns too. But human minds don't work that way. We're random, chaotic, and completely unpredictable." Captain Maya Rodriguez spoke up from her ship somewhere in the outer system. She had been leading scouting missions, watching for the first signs of the swarm's arrival. "I'm seeing strange readings on the long-range sensors," she reported. "Dark shapes moving between the stars. They're still far away, but they're definitely coming." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this news. The enemy they had been preparing to fight was finally approaching. All their work, all their plans were about to be tested. "How long do we have?" Nick asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3, Maya replied. "They're moving faster than we expected." Nick looked around the room at the people who would lead humanity's defense. An engineer covered in grease, a professor with thick glasses, a pilot who looked too young to drink, and a doctor who spent her time in underground labs. Not exactly the heroes you'd see in movies, but they were what humanity had. "Listen carefully," Nick said. "Every other race that faced the swarm tried to run, hide, or negotiate. None of that worked, but no one has tried what we're going to try." "Which is?" Colonel Nelson asked. "We're going to fight them like humans fight. Not like advanced aliens with perfect technology and logical minds. We're going to be chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely refuse to give up." Amy smiled for the first time in weeks. "So we fight dirty." "We fight human," Nick corrected. "Alan, I want every piece of data about swarm behavior sent to all ship captains. Paula, get those new weapons installed on every ship we have. Steve, make sure the colonies know the enemy is coming. And Dr. Stone," he continued, "keep studying what makes humans different. I have a feeling we're going to need every advantage we can get." As the meeting broke up, Nick stayed behind to look at the tactical displays. Red dots showed the approaching swarm, while blue dots marked human defenses. The numbers weren't encouraging, but humans had won fights against bad odds before. Paula walked over to him before leaving. "General, do you really think we can win this?" Nick was quiet for a moment. "I think we can make them regret coming here. Sometimes that's enough." Outside the war room, alarms began sounding across human space. The final preparations began as word spread that the enemy was almost here. On Earth, children practiced hiding in shelters. On Mars, workers finished the last weapons. In the asteroid belt, miners loaded their cargo ships with explosives. Humanity stood alone against an enemy that had destroyed 47 civilizations. They had no allies, no superweapons, and no guarantee of victory. But they had something that had carried them from caves to stars. They had the stubborn human refusal to quit, even when quitting made sense. And in 2 weeks, the galaxy would learn what that really meant. The mining colony of Haven's Rest sat on the edge of human space, a small world where 3,000 people dug rare metals from underground tunnels. Colonel Steve Nelson had spent 2 weeks turning the peaceful mining town into a fortress, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The swarm had arrived 3 days ago, their dark ships appearing like oil stains against the stars. Now they hung in orbit above Haven's Rest, preparing for their attack. Steve watched them through his binoculars, counting at least 50 vessels that looked nothing like normal ships. "They look alive," said Sergeant Tony Clark, standing beside him on the colony's main wall. Tony was right. The swarm ships moved like swimming creatures, bending and twisting as they circled the planet. "Remember what Dr. Carter told us," Steve said. "They're part machine, part living creature. They can heal damage, but they also feel pain." The first attack came at dawn. Dark shapes dropped from the sky like falling rain, each one the size of a car but moving like a flying snake. The creatures had no clear heads or tails, just writhing masses of black material that seemed to absorb light. Steve's defenders opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons lit up the sky and rifle shots cracked like thunder. The swarm creatures kept coming, but something strange happened. Instead of the quick victory they usually achieved, the battle slowed down. "They're not moving like the report said they would," Tony observed, firing his rifle at a creature that had landed near the wall. "They seemed confused." Steve noticed it too. The swarm creatures attacked in patterns like they expected the humans to respond in certain ways. But the human defenders didn't follow any patterns. Miners used their explosives knowledge to create traps. Farmers turned their equipment into weapons. Children threw rocks from hidden positions. The battle raged for 6 hours before the real surprise came. Lieutenant Kim Foster was leading her squad through the colony's main street when the swarm tried something new. A wave of mental pressure hit every human defender at once, like a voice trying to force its way into their minds. "Surrender," the voice whispered. "Submit. Join us." Kim felt the alien thoughts pressing against her mind, trying to take control. Most species would have broken under this mental attack, but Kim gritted her teeth and pushed back. "Get out of my head," she shouted, and somehow she did push the alien presence away. All around the colony, other humans were doing the same thing. The swarm's mental attacks, which had broken every other species they faced, couldn't get a solid grip on human minds. "This is impossible," one of Steve's communications officers reported. "The swarm's psychic weapons always work, but our people are fighting them off." Steve smiled grimly as he shot another creature climbing the wall. Maybe human stubbornness is good for something after all. High above the battle, Captain Maya Rodriguez watched from her stealth ship. She had been ordered to observe the first, contact and report back to Earth. What she saw amazed her. The swarm creatures were hesitating. For the first time in their existence, they had met an enemy that didn't react the way they expected. Human defenders popped up in unexpected places, used weapons in strange ways, and refused to break even when surrounded. "This is Captain Rodriguez. To Earth Command," she spoke into her radio. "The swarm is having trouble with our forces. Repeat, the enemy appears confused by human tactics." Commander Amy Davis arrived with her fighter squadron just as the ground battle reached its worst point. Her pilots dove through the atmosphere, engaging swarm flyers in the sky above the colony. The space battle was unlike anything the pilots had trained for. Swarm creatures moved in 3 dimensions like fish swimming through water, but Amy's pilots adapted quickly, using their smaller ships and faster reflexes to dance around the larger enemies. "They're trying to surround us," called out pilot Jake Wilson over the radio. "Then don't let them," Amy replied, spinning her fighter through a turn that would have made alien pilots sick. "Use the planet's gravity. Make them work for every shot. Away." Human fighters dove toward the planet's surface, forcing the swarm creatures to follow. Then they pulled up at the last second, using the gravity to slingshot around the planet while their enemies crashed into the atmosphere. Back on the ground, the battle had become a street-by-street fight. Tony Clark led his squad through the mining tunnels, using the underground passages to pop up behind swarm positions. The creatures had never faced an enemy that used tunnels this way. "They keep expecting us to stand and fight like soldiers," Tony explained to his men. "But we're miners. We know these tunnels better than they know their own ships." The swarm creatures were learning, but slowly. Their hive mind had to process new information and change tactics for millions of creatures at once. Humans could adapt instantly, each person thinking of new ideas and trying them immediately. Dr. Rebecca Stone's research proved correct in the most dramatic way possible. Human brains, chaotic and unpredictable, were exactly what the swarm couldn't handle. Every time the creatures thought they understood human behavior, the humans did something completely different. The battle for Haven's Rest lasted 3 days. In the end, the colony fell, but not the way anyone expected. Steve Nelson ordered the evacuation on the second day, but his people kept fighting, even as they retreated to the escape ships. "Colonel, we need to go now," Tony urged as swarm creatures overran the main square. "5 more minutes," Steve replied, setting charges on the colony's main power plant. "I want them to remember this place." The explosion lit up the sky as the last human ships lifted off. The swarm had taken Haven's Rest, but they had paid a price no other species had ever made them pay. More importantly, they had learned that humans were different. Maya Rodriguez followed the evacuation ships, her sensors recording everything. As they reached safe distance, she compiled her report for Earth. "The swarm took heavy losses," she reported. "More than they've ever taken in a first contact battle. They seem unable to predict human behavior. Their psychic attacks failed completely. And sir, they actually retreated twice during the battle. I've never seen them retreat before." Back on Earth, Admiral Jake Morrison read the report with growing excitement. "They can be hurt, they can be confused, and they can be forced to retreat." General Nick Taylor nodded. "Haven's Rest was just a mining colony with 3,000 people. We have billions of humans and thousands of worlds. If the swarm had trouble with one small colony, then maybe we have a chance after all," Jake finished. The news spread through human space like wildfire. The swarm could be fought. They weren't unstoppable after all. For the first time since the aliens abandoned them, humans began to believe they might actually win. But the swarm was learning too. The hive mind was processing the data from Haven's Rest, trying to understand this new type of enemy. The next battle would be different. However, so would humanity. They had learned something important at Haven's Rest. They had discovered that being human was not a weakness in this war. It was their greatest strength. 3 months after Haven's Rest, the war had spread across 20 human star systems. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching tactical displays that showed battles raging from the core worlds to the outer colonies. The swarm had adapted since their first defeat, but so had humanity. "Report from New Kansas," his communications officer announced. "Major Lucy Bennett says they're holding the line." Jake smiled. New Kansas was a farming world where corn grew in vast fields under an orange sun. Major Bennett had turned those peaceful farmers into warriors, and they were giving the swarm more trouble than anyone expected. On New Kansas, Lucy Bennett crouched behind a barn while swarm creatures moved through the cornfields like dark shadows. Her army consisted of farmers, their families, and whatever weapons they could make from farm equipment. "They're in Sector 7, called out Tom Baker, a corn farmer who now carried a plasma rifle. "Moving toward the grain silos." Lucy nodded. The swarm always went for the largest structures first, thinking they were military targets. They didn't understand that humans put their important things in small hidden places. "Let them have the silos," she said. "We'll hit them from the irrigation tunnels." Her people moved through underground water channels that connected the entire farming region. The swarm's sensors couldn't track them through the flowing water, and their hive mind couldn't predict which tunnel they'd come out of next. When the attack came, it came from everywhere at once. Farmers popped up from hidden positions, fired their weapons, and disappeared back underground before the swarm could respond. Tractors converted into tanks rolled out of barns, fired their cannons, and retreated through secret passages. "This is insane," muttered Private Dan Foster, a young soldier who had been sent to help defend New Kansas. "We're fighting a galactic invasion with farm equipment." "Farm equipment that works," Lucy replied, watching her people execute another perfect ambush. "The swarm expects military tactics. We're giving them something they've never seen before." Space above New Kansas, Commander Amy Davis led her fighter squadrons in a different kind of battle. The swarm had brought bigger ships this time, massive creatures that looked like flying cities. But Amy had learned new tricks since Haven's rest. Use the asteroid field, she ordered her pilots. Make them chase us through the rocks. Her fighters dove into a nearby asteroid belt, weaving between floating mountains of stone and metal. The swarm ships followed, their larger size making them clumsy in the tight spaces. Now, Amy called out. Her pilots triggered explosive charges they had planted on the asteroids weeks earlier. The rocks exploded in sequence, creating a chain reaction that trapped the swarm ships in a maze of debris. Target their weak spots, Amy ordered. Dr. Carter said to aim for the glowing sections. The human fighters darted through the debris field, hitting the swarm ships with precise shots while the larger vessels struggled to maneuver. It was like watching dolphins attack whales, small and fast against big and slow. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Carter was working with Professor Alan Brooks to understand the swarm's new tactics. They had samples from destroyed creatures and data from dozens of battles. They're trying to adapt, Lisa explained to the War Council. But they're doing it wrong. They think like a hive mind, so they assume we think like a hive mind too. What does that mean for us? Asked General Nick Taylor. It means every time they learn one of our tricks, we can just invent a new one, Alan replied. They expect us to keep doing the same thing over and over, but humans never do the same thing twice. Dr. Rebecca Stone joined the conversation from her lab on Mars. I've been studying the brain scans from our soldiers after swarm mental attacks. The data is fascinating. What did you find? Jake asked. Human minds don't just resist the swarm's psychic control, Rebecca explained. We actually hurt them when they try to control us. Our chaotic thoughts cause pain to their hive mind. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Humanity's greatest weakness, their inability to think in perfect unison, was actually a weapon against the swarm. So every time they try to control our people, Nick began. We cause feedback that hurts their entire network, Rebecca finished. The more they try to dominate us, the more damage we do to them. The tide of war began to turn at the Battle of New Yorktown. General Taylor had set a trap using an old human strategy. Make the enemy think you're weaker than you really are. New Yorktown appeared to be humanity's last major stronghold, protected by massive shields and thousands of ships. The swarm committed their largest force yet to breaking this final human defense. But as their ships moved into attack position, they discovered that New Yorktown was actually bait. Hidden human fleets emerged from behind moons, inside asteroid fields, and even from the gas clouds of nearby nebulae. All units execute Operation Hornet's Nest, Taylor commanded. The attack came from every direction at once. Small human ships swarmed the larger swarm vessels like angry insects. Converted cargo ships launched missiles while disguised civilian vessels revealed hidden weapons. Captain Ryan Hayes led one attack group from his command ship, a former cruise liner now bristling with weapons. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight, he told his captains. We're trying to win, period. The human fleet used tactics that no military academy would teach. They rammed damaged ships into enemy vessels. They used civilian freighters as suicide bombs. They even launched garbage and scrap metal as projectiles when they ran out of real ammunition. But the strangest part of the battle happened when the swarm tried their ultimate weapon. A massive psychic attack designed to shut down every human mind in the system. Instead of breaking, the human defenders fought back. Millions of chaotic, stubborn, angry human thoughts hit the swarm's hive mind. Like a mental explosion, the feedback was so severe that swarm ships actually stopped moving for several minutes. Their command ships are just floating, reported Commander Davis from her fighter. They look stunned. Press the attack, Admiral Morrison ordered. Hit them while they're down. The battle ended with something unprecedented in galactic history. The swarm retreated from a fight they were winning. Their ships pulled back to the edge of the system and regrouped, clearly confused by what had happened. News of the victory at New Yorktown spread through human space faster than light. For the first time, people began to believe they might actually survive this war. But more importantly, the galaxy was watching. Long-range sensors detected ships from various alien civilizations observing the battles from safe distances. The species that had abandoned humanity were now watching humans do the impossible. "Sir," Jake's communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Empire. Chancellor Vextar wants to speak with you." Jake looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without reading it. "Tell any alien ships that approach our space that they're not welcome," he ordered. "They made their choice 6 months ago. Now they can watch us make ours." The war was far from over, but humanity had proven something important. They could not only fight the swarm, they could beat them. And they were doing it alone, just as they had promised. The final battle began when Earth's sun was blocked out by swarm ships. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, humanity's first ship built specifically to fight the swarm. Around him, the largest human fleet ever assembled prepared for the war's last fight. "How many ships do they have?" asked Captain Ryan Hayes from his position at the weapons console. "Too many to count," replied the sensor officer, "but fewer than they started with 6 months ago." Jake smiled grimly. The swarm had lost ships in every battle since Haven's Rest. They were still dangerous, but they were no longer the unstoppable force that had destroyed 47 civilizations. The enemy had adapted to human tactics, but humans had adapted faster. Dr. Lisa Carter's final weapon was ready, a virus that attacked the swarm's hive mind itself, created using human knowledge of chaos and unpredictability. "Dr. Carter, are you ready?" Jake asked over the communication system. "The virus is loaded into all our ships," Lisa replied from her laboratory deep underground. "The moment we make contact with their network, it will spread through their entire hive mind." On the surface of Earth, Major Lucy Bennett commanded ground defenses that turned every city into a fortress. Farmers, miners, engineers, and ordinary citizens stood ready with weapons they had built in their own workshops. "Remember," Lucy told her people over the radio, "the swarm expects us to break and run when they land. Instead, we're going to show them what humans do when we're protecting our home." In space, Commander Amy Davis led the fighter attack that would begin the battle. Her pilots had learned to use everything as a weapon: space debris, gravity wells, even the solar wind itself. "All fighters, begin attack run," Amy ordered. "Let's show them how humans say goodbye." The space battle that followed was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships attacked from impossible angles, used suicidal tactics that somehow worked, and refused to retreat even when surrounded. Captain Maya Rodriguez commanded a squadron of converted cargo ships that had been turned into giant shotguns, firing clouds of metal pellets that confused the swarm's sensors. Her ships looked like flying junkyards, but they fought like wolves. "Target their command creatures," she ordered. "Dr. Carter says the big glowing ones control the smaller ships." The human fleet swarmed over the swarm ships like angry bees. They used tactics that no sane military would approve: ramming attacks, point-blank missile exchanges, and weapons fired at such close range that both ships were damaged by the explosion. But the real surprise came when the swarm tried to take control of human minds on a massive scale. Every creature in their fleet focused their psychic power on breaking human will. Instead of surrender, they got chaos. Millions of human minds, each one different and unpredictable, hit back at the same time. The mental feedback was so powerful that it traveled through the swarm's hive mind like electricity through water. Dr. Rebecca Stone, monitoring the battle from her underground lab, watched her instruments with amazement. "The psychic feedback is off the charts," she reported. "Their hive mind is actually shutting down in sections." That was when Dr. Carter's virus activated. Carried by the psychic feedback, it spread through the swarm's network like a disease. But this wasn't just any virus, it was pure human chaos, programmed to make the hive mind think random, contradictory thoughts. Swarm ships began moving in circles. Some attacked each other. Others simply stopped working as their controlling minds became confused by human-style chaos. On Earth's surface, the ground battle was just as fierce. Swarm creatures landed in every major city, but they found something they had never encountered before: an entire planet's population that refused to be conquered. Colonel Steve Nelson led the defense of New York, where skyscrapers had been turned into vertical fortresses. Citizens fought from rooftops, subways, and sewers, using the city itself as a weapon. They're trying to reach the government buildings, reported Sergeant Tony Clark from his position in Central Park. Let them, Steve replied. The real government is down in the bunkers. Those buildings are just bait. When the swarm creatures reached the empty government buildings, they found them rigged with enough explosives to level city blocks. The explosion could be seen from orbit, but the most important moment came when alien ships began appearing at the edge of the solar system. The Thrakari, Zephyrians, Nereids, and other species that had abandoned humanity were returning, drawn by reports of human victories. Chancellor Vextar's voice came over all frequencies. This is the Zephyrian Empire requesting permission to assist in the final battle. Jake looked at the tactical display showing dozens of alien ships approaching. These were the same beings who had called humans too violent and primitive. The same ones who had fled at the first sign of danger. Admiral Morrison, Vextar continued, we were wrong to abandon you. Allow us to help end this threat. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Around him, the battle raged as human ships continued their desperate fight against the swarm. His people were dying to protect not just Earth but the entire galaxy. Negative, Jake replied simply. We declared we would fight alone. That declaration stands. But Admiral, the Thrakari delegate interrupted, together we can end this war quickly. We are ending it, Captain Hayes said, firing another salvo at a swarm command ship. Without your help, the alien fleets could only watch as humanity proved something that no one thought possible. A single species fighting alone was defeating an enemy that had conquered multiple galaxies. Amy Davis led the final attack against the swarm's core ship, a massive creature that controlled all the others. Her fighters dove through enemy fire that lit up space like fireworks. This is for Haven's Rest, she said, launching her missiles at point-blank range. The explosion that followed marked the end of the swarm's leadership. Without their central control, the remaining creatures began fleeing toward deep space, their hive mind broken by human chaos. On Earth's surface, Lucy Bennett watched the last swarm creatures retreat to their ships. Her people cheered as the dark vessels lifted off and disappeared into space. All units cease fire, Jake announced to the human fleet. The enemy is retreating, but the cheering stopped when the alien fleets approached again. This time they weren't asking for permission to help. They were asking for forgiveness. Admiral Morrison, Vextar said, his voice humble, we have witnessed something remarkable today. Humanity has accomplished what we thought impossible. Yes, Jake replied. We have. We would like to discuss new alliances, the Nereid representative added. We understand now that we made a terrible mistake. Jake looked around his bridge at the humans who had fought this war. They were covered in sweat, exhausted, and some were wounded. But they had won. They had stood alone against the darkness and emerged victorious. You're right, Jake said finally. You did make a mistake. You judged us by your own standards and found us wanting, but we didn't fight this war to prove anything to you. Then, why? Vextar asked. We fought because someone had to, Ryan answered. Because running away and hiding isn't the human way. Jake activated the fleet-wide communication system so that every human ship could hear his words. 6 months ago, you called us too violent, too primitive, too dangerous to be allies. You were probably right. We are violent when we need to be. We are primitive enough to use farm equipment as weapons, and we are definitely dangerous. He paused, looking out at the alien ships waiting at the edge of human space. But we're also something you apparently aren't. We're brave enough to stand and fight when others run away. The alien fleets waited for an answer to their request for alliance. Jake thought about the billions of humans who had died in this war, the colonies that had been destroyed, and the people who had fought with nothing but courage and stubbornness. Earth is willing to discuss trade agreements and mutual defense pacts, he finally said, with species that prove they can stand with us when things get difficult. But the days of humanity depending on others for our survival are over. We have learned that we are stronger when we stand alone, Amy added from her fighter, and we will never forget that lesson. As the alien fleets began broadcasting their acceptance of human terms, Jake looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, The remnants of the swarm were fleeing to whatever hole they had crawled out of, and somewhere else other species were learning that the galaxy had a new power. Humanity had declared they would fight alone. They had kept that promise. And in doing so, they had discovered something more valuable than any alliance. They had discovered what it truly meant to be human.